So if a reference product batch used in bioequivalence study expires before the study is complete, it may be acceptable to utilize a different batch of unexpired reference product to complete that BE study, as long as the prospective applicant provides adequate scientific justifications for the use of different batches of reference products in their bioequivalence studies. If you do decide to use different batches of reference products in your bioequivalence study for these purposes, and please submit any inquiries with any specific proposals or any other alternative proposals you think that's relevant to demonstrate bioequivalence for your proposed test product via controlled correspondence pathway, or if applicable, so you can submit that questions via pre-end meeting request pathway. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. Next question for Dr. Bai. What are the agency's recommendations to reduce the chance of cross-infection by COVID-19 virus during the study sampling period?
Thank you for that question. Overall, there are several approaches that can be used to reduce the chances of cross-infections by COVID-19 during your study sampling period. One approach you may consider to reduce participant or staff exposure to COVID-19 is to reduce the number of visits by using alternative PK modeling approach. You can use modeling approach to optimize PK sampling time points. So please investigate this approach and submit any details to the agency for review. Acceptability of this approach may be considered by FDA to establish VE between your test product and the RLD product without compromising on quality of the data. So another approach you may consider to reduce exposure between participants is by scheduling the participant visits such the visits should not overlap with each other. As in my presentation, I have mentioned, which is called staggered dosing. So spacing the initial dosing visit for the participants would ensure the subsequent visits would be similarly spaced out. So this method can provide some flexibilities to site staff to schedule the ambulatory sampling visits so they do not overlap. Another approach we can also consider is performing the PK sampling at home. So you may explore this approach as an alternative method, but you have to submit a complete package for the validation study for this approach. In addition, a correlation study should be performed to assure samples collected at home would provide the same results as the samples taken at the study site. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one last question for Dr. Bai, and here's the question. Can a prospective ANDA applicant submit its in vivo BE study data with a truncated sampling scheme if some study samples could not be collected?
Thank you for the question. In general, if a drug product is characterized as a long terminal elimination half-life, for example, the half-life is greater than 24 hours, and the missing samples are the last ambulatory study samples, the prospective and the applicant may truncate the sampling scheme to the appropriate time points. For example, 72 hours. That's the most common truncated time points we've seen. And also with the area under the curve, AUC truncated to 72 hours in place of AUCT or AUC infinity. As long as the data up to the truncated time point, for example, 72 hours, adequately characterize the peak concentration as well as the time to reach the peak concentration. But if the drug product is not a long terminal elimination half-life drug, or the missing samples are more than the last few sampling time points, the prospective and the applicant may propose any specific alternative proposal. For example, you may consider using simulation and a modeling approach to justify the large missing sample time points. So please submit any specific questions or your proposal in your in the control correspondence pathway, or if applicable, using the pre-end meeting request pathway to submit your proposal to the agency for review. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next group of questions will be directed to Dr. Abellard, and here's the first question. For a new additional facility that has received multiple gold dates on accepted PASs of approved ANDAs, this is the scenario. Due to COVID-19 travel restrictions, the PAI is pending for this site. Based on the new guidance by FDA, does this facility fall under the scope of remote PAI inspections?
So thank you for that question. In general, the agency will use the existing risk management methods and the related tools to determine when to request a facility's participation in remote interactive evaluations. The FDA conducts inspections for many purposes and programs, including PAIs, PLIs, post-approval, surveillance for cause, bioresearch monitoring programs. The agency will consider each of these inspectional program areas as possible candidates for remote interactive evaluations, or RIEs as we're calling these, recognizing that there will be instances where only an on-site inspection would be appropriate. So again, it's based on risk and evaluation of the other information we may have on that facility. Thanks for that question.
Thanks for responding to that question. The next question is for Dr. Abellard. Is there coordination between the OPMA reviewer and the ORA PAM as part of the district file review on what is being asked in the records request? We've seen the summary requests for documents come from both ORA PAM and through reviewer IRs.
Thanks for that question. That's a great question. We do hear this quite often. So yeah, the OPMA reviewers and the ORA CSOs or PAMs do coordinate records being requested during a 704A4 records request. They do evaluate each other's requests. They all go in on the same 704, and they work together to evaluate them when the records come back in most cases, particularly for PAIs. Surveillance 704A4s may be handled solely by ORA. I just want to point out that an IR may be sent to the applicant to update the application with information that was noted during the 704A4 process. That may be why you feel like could be some duplication between the application IRs and the 704A4 records requests, but in reality, oftentimes we notice things in the record requests that information really needs to be updated in the application, and therefore you may see IRs come through for those. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have one more question for Dr. Abellard, and here's the question. Is the site classification NAI, VAI, OAI of the specific site updated as a result of the PAI, PLI records request or remote interactive evaluation?
That's another great question. So at this time, the site classification is not impacted for PAI or PLI record requests or RIEs. As I said, that's at this time. And so therefore your site classification, your NAI, VAI, OAI are not updated or changed due to a PAI or PLI records request. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. The next set of questions will go to Dr. Swoboda. And here's the first question. Is travel restriction applicable to U.S. sites for PAI?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to throw this out right away. I think all the questions we have come in are great. So thank you for these, and we'll do our best to answer them. In this particular question, yes, travel restrictions are applicable in U.S. sites. And as we note in some of our communications relating to travel restrictions, we're going based on the risk of the area in determination as to whether a on-site PAI may take place. And so we follow, relevant travel risk advisories in making a decision whether an on-site PAI may take place in a certain area, domestic or international.
Thank you for responding to that question. The next question for Dr. Swoboda. Is there a 90-day decisional letter after a 704 record request evaluation?
There seems to be a lot of questions coming in to this point, and I'm hoping that the talk elaborate a little bit more on this. And the highlight to this is the assessment issues letter that I discussed earlier in the presentation. This letter is sent out at the conclusion of the 704A4 assessment. This letter is sent out for all 704A4 assessments, whether they're acceptable, they're not, whether inspections, on-site inspections are needed or not. So under the circumstances, under all the different outcomes that we could get from a 704A4 assessment, an AIL letter will be sent to the firm notifying them, one, that the 704 is complete and the status of the assessment for additional information, and it may be requesting additional information that may be addressed through a follow-up response to the AIL letter as previously indicated.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we have time for about one more question, and here's a question for Dr. Swoboda. When deciding whether a PAI or 704 will be performed, what information is evaluated from other regulatory authorities, and who are those regulatory authorities?
So I want to refer back to the slide discussing two different things. One, the mutual recognition agreement that we talked about earlier in the presentation, but also just the general risk assessment slide that OPMA and ORA, sort of that process that we go through in determining whether a PAI or a 704 is appropriate for a particular facility in a particular application for a pre-approval evaluation. So when it comes to other regulatory agencies, we rely on the mutual recognition agreement. This is between the FDA and EU. However, we're also relying on inspection reports done by capable MRA partners in third countries, countries other than the U.S. or or the countries associated with the EU. So we're using a variety of resources to assess whether a 704 is possible in lieu of an on-site PAI, and we're really grateful for some of these programs that have been set up prior to COVID-19 that are helping us to mitigate some of these, the PAIs that we need to conduct.
Thank you for responding to that question. That's the last. We're out of time for questions, and we want to give a huge thank you to all of our speakers for the presentations